investors early on. I think they did £25,000 each or so at the very early stages. They invested without looking at a pitch deck. The big thing isn't the idea, and I think you're exactly right. It's about a building. I always say, can you do this without investment? 90+% of the time.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Hidden Blueprint by Pragmat, a podcast for aspiring entrepreneurs and business leaders where we uncover the blueprint behind some of the world's best. Today we're incredibly excited to welcome Brent Oldfield, co-founder and chief operating officer of Voltric. Brent co-founded Voltric while still studying at university, at which point he was already a serial entrepreneur, having founded 2 other companies previously. With Voltric's success, Brent has been named one of the top UK student founders. If you're young and want to start your own business, then this is a must watch. This is the blueprint of Brent Oldfield. Brent, you co-founded Voltric in 2019 while still studying at university. Since then, you've been recognised as a finalist in the UWE Entrepreneur of the Year Award and named one of the top UK student founders. What sparks your passion for entrepreneurship at such a young age?
I think for me, it definitely had to be a spark from my parents, both of them being entrepreneurs themselves. It definitely gave me a sense of passion for being your own boss. I've always had a thing that I've never written a CV before. Definitely worked a few jobs, but being my own boss has definitely been number one for me. That sense of freedom that a lot of people mention in traveling whilst you work hasn't been number one. I think it's just been about creating value and having something to live by, and that's definitely something my parents did. So trying to follow in their footsteps, I guess.
That's brilliant to hear. I wanted to touch a little bit more on the university side of things. University is a very busy time for a lot of people, a lot of fun and a lot of work to be done. How did you go about balancing co-founding an organization such as the nature of Voltric with your university studies?
It's interesting because a lot of people who know about Voltric may not know that this wasn't my first startup. I've run a few startups in my time, from delivering pizza to campuses at Bristol and UE, as well as another one I started back in Guernsey, where I'm from, brought to university. So actually, Voltric came about towards the end of my first year. The big thing, and I know we were having a conversation just before as well, Bruno, is around, making the most of your first year. A lot of people, like you say, will use it for fun, going out a lot. I kind of try to avoid a lot of that and just grow my businesses. I wasn't eligible to student loans, not being from England itself. So self-funding university made it definitely tough, and I didn't have that opportunity to use a student loan to just go out and enjoy my first year. I really had to create value and some money. So that's where, it wasn't such potluck with the loans being put towards me. I had to make my own money.
You mentioned some of the previous businesses that you also founded. Would you mind touching on those a little bit? And also, I'd like to sort of understand a little bit about what you think was important for those experiences to shape your journey now with Voltric.
Yeah, absolutely. Both a lot smaller than what Voltric is now. One was called Lampco, which was based when I was 16 in Guernsey, maybe 17. And basically it's upcycling people's wedding champagne bottles. So you get a nice bottle of champagne for your wedding and we turn it into home decor. Lamps, all that kind of stuff that would be a feature piece of your house. So we take the champagne bottle and we turn it into a feature and send it back, charge anywhere between £100 to £300 a piece when the materials is very little. So I brought that to university in Bristol and ended up having 2 shops. Part of where I was talking about how UE are great at funding programs, they actually paid for all of my shops, and I sold it through that. The second was a pizza delivery company, so I partnered with someone in their final years of entrepreneurship at the university, and we essentially created an on-campus delivery of food, mainly pizzas, but chips, all that kind of stuff. For me, it was I've got to pay £9,000 a year in student fees. I had to make that plus some to live. That was essentially my target for the first year and a half of running that company. It wasn't so much about this grand vision like I have with Voltric and others. It was essentially pay for my fees. So it was a slightly different model, but that definitely taught me work ethic, finishing studies, 4 or 5 p.m. I'd then start cooking in the kitchen at 5 until 2 a.m. and we go again at 8 and the next morning back to uni, whilst trying to be at the idea stage of Voltric with my business partner. So definitely taught me a bit of work ethic and, allowed me a little bit less time to be going out and having fun and wasting my first year of uni, really.
Yeah, definitely some skills that would have passed on and definitely would have had a significant contributing factor towards the success of Voltric, which I do now want to touch on a little bit. To our audience, would you be able to explain a little bit about what Voltric does?
Of course. So Voltric essentially provides an electric vehicle subscription service on demand. So we provide everything you need to have a road-ready car. So that is the electric car itself, insurance, maintenance, breakdown, everything you need to get going. And we have an area of focus over the years since we started back in 2019, but we mostly work on salary sacrifice schemes. So we work with a couple of large companies such as Holland and Barrett, Just Eat, Curve, and a FTSE 100 company, and to provide schemes for their employees and electric cars. We have a little bit more of a visionary goal, which is outside of just electric cars, but we're looking about how can we make someone, essentially move sustainably, easily, economically as well, from A to B, whether that be from Bristol to somewhere in France. We'll provide, a sustainable form of transport the whole way via an app. That is part of the future vision that we're building, and the first step of that really has been this electric car subscription.
It's definitely a unique concept. I'd be eager to learn a little bit about how the idea actually came about.
Absolutely. So I joined with my business partner Julian in 2019. Essentially done a master's in marketing where he'd written a thesis about subscription models in the market. So there was a company called Drover at the time, 2018, 2019, who were supplying petrol cars on a flexi model, essentially. So you're hitting that bracket between rental and leasing, where essentially there's just some big finance factors that make the difference between the two. And there wasn't anything with electric vehicles. So we ended up joining forces. I had a slightly different business model, if I'm honest, in 2019. And we essentially sat down with one of our investors and mentors and said, we need to make a pivot. We either go down this, essentially a car wow model of subscription via a website, or we actually build what we have today physically, which was very hard with finance being very expensive as a young company and you're financing tens and tens of thousands of cars. So we simply used a decision matrix to basically take any of our, emotional thought out of the equation. And we sat and just said, whichever the answer comes out of, we'll stick with. And that's where Voltric was essentially pivoted and was born, was simply through an Excel spreadsheet. I probably still have somewhere today.
It's really interesting to hear. I mean, it's probably one of the biggest factors that contribute to an entrepreneur's success, the actual idea behind the business. I mean, you hear it over and over again. An idea is worth nothing, and it's how you take it from idea to business. But a lot of entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs out there, sometimes feel a little bit inhibited by the fact that they maybe don't have an idea. What would you say to someone thinking about starting their own business in coming up with a good idea and how they can maybe facilitate that?
Especially at our age, I think the big thing isn't the idea, and I think you're exactly right. It's about a building character. A big part of what I did at the team entrepreneurship degree at UE was soft skills. So coaching, even borderline going towards a bit more harder skill like mentoring, but actually doing that yourself. So myself coaching others and learning how to do that through qualifications, but just doing it on a daily basis. I think that's the biggest part of being an entrepreneur. It's about I'm probably the least smart person in the team we have at Voltric. It's about employing the right people to do the right job. And if you can do that and be a people person, whether that's coaching, getting people in, I'm essentially our HR at the moment is more what I do than actual day-to-day tasks. And that's where we employ people. So I think the big thing is not the idea, it's being a people person. And, my first 2 startups weren't ever going to blow the world away. They weren't anything special. When I look at it, it wasn't a big idea. It'd been done many, many times over in many countries. But it gave me the skills to work with people. You mentioned one of the great lessons. What did I learn from my first startups? And I think that was employing people, how difficult that can be, as how rewarding that can be also. You're essentially taking their livelihoods, their problems, their mortgages, their family all on your shoulders. And I think that's the biggest thing, especially at our age, to have that level of responsibility that you might not even have yourself. I don't have a mortgage, I don't have kids. I feel like I've got many with how many people you're looking after, and you've got to make sure you've got payroll for every month for the next 6 months. I think that's the biggest learning for me. Yeah. Do I think Voltric's going to be my big idea as an entrepreneur? I don't know. It may be another one coming up. So don't get stuck down or bogged down on that idea. When we first started Voltric, it wasn't what it is today, even the idea wise. You will pivot 10, 15 times along the journey until you hit on something that might be great, or you might actually make a decision, shut it down, start something new. So yeah, that's the big thing. Become a people person. And that's really where you get investment from, great team from, partners from. That's really all it's about.
I wanted to go a little bit more into the actual hiring process, as you just mentioned. Again, people see these massive organizations, they see Apple, they see Google, but at the end of the day, behind it all, there are people, and the same with your organization. How has the hiring process been, effectively going from yourself and your co-founder with just an idea, all of a sudden you're getting people, you're recruiting people onto the team, you're paying them. How did that sort of transpire for you?
It was a bit of a whirlwind journey, if I'm honest. Just before the, I guess, spike of COVID, really, which did make a big difference to us. You know, delays in deliveries of cars, all sorts of problems. You know, we grew to quite a large team. You know, we were hiring people every other week or so. You know, we ended up actually having to essentially let quite a few staff go as we downsized and tried to get through a turbulent time where a lot of our competitors were going into administration. You know, so that for us was really tough. I talk about having those responsibilities on your shoulder. I think that can make the hiring process really tough. For us, you know, the people who are still here today, since, you know, people who've been employed for 2-3 years now, they may not have been the best person during the interviews. And we've noticed that quite often. They may have not been that standout star, but it was all about character. And that's why I actually do have my business partner, Julie, and I always make sure we've got an in-person interview. So, you know, I currently live in a different country, but when we do interview processes, I'll fly over and we have a week of interviews with a bunch of people in the office. And I think that character building, even if they're going to work remote, is so big for us. If we know this may cause a clash within one of the existing team, you know, that's the end of the interview stage for that person, because that's more important for us to have a positive environment than it is affect our existing team. It's important, and we don't go by, you know, write projects for us before you come and join our team. We get we're a startup, we are a risk. But the people who are willing to take that risk, there's usually something great about their character. And there's usually a reason why they're doing it. You know, they've got a bit of drive. And that's what we're always striving for. You know, by giving equity in the company via share options and stuff, that always makes people want to be part of your vision. Every employee, whether you're, you know, a Voltric driver and delivering cars, or whether you're management, you get the same amount of share options. That's something we've kind of given and made sure that everybody feels as equal.
Yeah, and I mean, definitely the earliest employees that you did hire, effectively you're bringing someone into an idea that's been solely yourself and your co-founder, and the importance of them is vital. What would you say about your earliest hires, and how did you really spot the quality in them, knowing that they're going to add a lot of value to your team?
Not had that question before. Interestingly, I have a thought about it, is actually the people who were the most nervous ended up being the best hires. And I know it sounds silly, but I felt we had a lot of people interview, you know, not naming names, but we had people interview who felt they were above us. You know, you were being employed by someone who I was 19, maybe even 18 at the time. You know, people who thought they were greater because they had 30 years experience in the market. Great, but we're trying to do something new and different, which you won't have experience in. So I actually found the people who were nervous and excited for the job, you know, it felt like they had walked into an Apple interview. They were the best hires because they weren't looking down at a startup. They were looking at the vision and, you know, those kind of people. So we always say, you know, they don't have a boss. We all work together. But I find the people who, you know, didn't look at it as you're being employed by a 19-year-old, or even partners, for example, people we partner with in business, you know, I find when they find out you're about your age, it makes quite a difference. And it definitely does during the hiring process as well.
Brent, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the pivot that you mentioned previously, but I want to take a little bit of a different turn on it. How difficult was that for you at the time on a sort of personal level? I mean, you're working on these ideas, you're constantly in a state of doubt. You don't know whether you're pursuing the right path. You don't know whether it's the time to change. How was that on you at the time?
To be honest, I'd usually say, and we've had smaller pivots over the years where, we turned to being a salary sacrifice scheme. Those have been tough, but that specific pivot we talk about, which was the bigger one that became Voltric today, per se, I actually found it quite a liberating feeling. I felt like we'd felt, essentially stagnant, stuck in the mud for quite a long time leading up to that process in 2020. So looking back 4 years now, but actually gave us a new leaf of life, essentially felt motivated again to build something new, albeit scary because we essentially become a revenue generating company. We were employing people and we were now saying, scrap that, we're starting again. And it was going to be completely starting again, new partners. We weren't going to be buying vehicles, etc. So it was scary, but at the same time, quite a motivating feeling. And I felt if we hadn't done that at the time, we would have stayed where we were. We wouldn't have grown and become, who we are today. So other pivots we've done, smaller, usually more scary, make you feel emotionally drained. But that one, I definitely think it gave us kind of a bit of a spark to create something new and more exciting and a bit more unique.
Yeah, I mean, that's always named as one of the biggest strengths of a startup, maybe in relation to a larger corporation, the fact that you're agile, you're able to change, you're able to pivot quickly, which is fantastic in theory. But as you mentioned, when you have employees, you have people on the payroll, people whose salaries you've got to make, it's a whole different ballgame all of a sudden. If you have to pivot, you've got investors who are demanding a certain standard from yourself, a certain level of returns. It's definitely a quite a daunting decision. So I did want to ask for an aspiring entrepreneur or maybe someone who's got their business, they're still in the early phases and they think they're going down a bad path. How would you say sort of tread that fine line between committing to a path and ensuring you give it the maximum amount of effort so that it could yield a payoff versus knowing when something clearly isn't working and it's time to change?
And it is a tough line to tread. And I think no one can answer that for you. Albeit what I'm about to say is probably kind of hypocritical on that point. It's more of a feeling of what you want to do. Do you feel you've exhausted all options? And I think that's why it's personal to that person, essentially because there may be a founder who feels like they have, and, essentially this idea may be a good idea, but you might not be the right person for it. Or vice versa, it may be a bad idea and just essentially might be the right person. You need to find another idea. So I'd say really it's about getting a good group of people behind you. I probably had 6 or 7 mentors whilst at university who essentially were personal mentors. They weren't focused on Voltric at the time. They may have been from my previous startup. They may have been in that stage where I had no startup. I had sold Lampco at the time and was deciding whether I pursue with Voltric. Having sound reasoning people behind you who've done this, a lot of the mentors I had sold startups, were investors, part of equity groups, just to say, am I going slightly insane here? Or is there other areas I could pursue? Have I tried this? Have I tried that? And they may say, yeah, you've done all of what I'd expect you to do. And that is probably the time to hang up the boots and look at something new. But I don't think you can make that decision yourself because you live in a bubble when you're in a startup. And it's very hard to see reasoning. And actually getting a third party perspective can be really important. But the reality is it's you who has to make that decision. Because if someone else makes it for you, you always have that what if. So I think you need to make the decision, but having a good 3-4+ mentors is really important as well. Not just one other person. You need a varied view from age groups, from diversity, from different markets as well. People who may not be in the car market, but have that kind of expertise.
Yeah, I mean, mentors are probably if you speak to any successful entrepreneur, they'll always go back to mentors, mentors, mentors. To maybe someone out there who, young entrepreneur or not, someone who's looking to acquire some mentors, build up their network of people to support them and give them advice, what would you say to them would be your advice in going about and actually finding these people to provide mentorship for them?
Someone asks you for money, they're not the right mentor. That's the first I'd start with, especially at a young age. I can get it when you get to people like Stephen Bartlett and stuff. They may be looking for someone who may have very little time and need to be paid. But as a young entrepreneur, maybe at uni, someone who's going to ask you for money isn't the right person. You'll find people out there, especially once they're extra entrepreneurs, they've sold, they may have not sold, they may have failed, or they've become a NED. They will want to do it because they want to help. And I think the greatest way of doing that is through, we were chatting about entrepreneurship, university schemes, places like that. The universities will have a set of mentors. In most cases, it's set in place. Those are a really good place to start. From there, it may be a mentor who says, I'm not focused in your market. I may not be right for you. I don't have the time. Ask them, do they know anyone else? I already at my age probably know 30, 40 different people who'd be willing to mentor, even if I wasn't myself. So speaking to one mentor and finding one, whether that through LinkedIn, through university, through anywhere, people will know others, and it creates a good network. And that can be from some of our greatest partnerships that we've done with Voltric, and investors have come through network connections, through mentors. So yeah, I'd say the main thing is someone who's asking you for money isn't going to be the right person. There'd be someone who's willing to do it out of their spare time.
So on that point of networking, especially, I mean, LinkedIn is probably one of the most powerful tools regarding networking and being able to connect with professionals all around the world. What would you say to young people out there who maybe are feeling a little bit timid regarding going and actually creating a LinkedIn account, number one, maybe doing a few posts, building up their connections, but actually going out and, sending messages, asking people for coffees, because that's one of the best ways to learn from successful people. Ask them for a coffee, ask them for maybe 5 minutes at a time, have a chat with them. What would you say to young people who maybe are feeling a little bit fearful, a little bit timid regarding that, thinking, oh, I don't want to be rejected, it's a bit cringe, they're worried about things like that? What would you say to them?
You never know till you try. That's the first one. Again, I keep talking about our partnerships, but it has been through networking. We signed a big partnership recently with a company that have 146 different locations in the UK alone, have over 100 different countries in the world that they operate in. And that was via a simple LinkedIn message from myself to an MD of the UK branch. So it doesn't take much. And I reckon I wrote a one-liner. All it takes is a bit of courage. And we've done it a few times with MDs of large companies across the UK where it's been a simple LinkedIn message. 24 hours later, we were signed up and partnered. I'd say the big thing for people who maybe, and I like you say, haven't created an account yet, they haven't seen the value in it. And myself as well, I probably, I don't post enough until I see the value in it. And that's why I use LinkedIn, great for messaging. I haven't posted a massive amount because I don't know if that'll bring value to what we're doing right now at this point. But I just say give it a go. You don't know until you try. And that's the biggest thing I notice in many things, whether that be, I'm a big believer in networking events, but I absolutely hate the things. About 20% of it provides value. Same with awards nights and events, all that kind of stuff. But when you go to them, you realise the value and you will keep going. So just do one. That's all I say. Give one a go. Same with messages or posts. And every person's unique. You don't need to do it all. We don't do a massive amount of posts. We haven't done paid marketing since 2020, July, I think it was, 4 or so years. It doesn't work for us right now. We go through B2B, but it may work for some people. So just try one. That's all I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, that advice is so applicable to many forms of life, not just LinkedIn messaging or LinkedIn posting. And it's actually directly applicable to launching a startup. Again, a lot of young people out there are plagued with maybe a fear of failure, which I think, again, I'll let you touch on this, but is probably the most irrational thing, because what you learn from the failure should be embraced. So what would you say to young people maybe out there, they don't want to start their business, they fear it's going to fail, and they're worried that it's not going to work?
I think if we're solely focused on people in their younger years, I think it's the best time to do it. And it may sound silly, but when you get older and you have mortgages in place, you have kids, those chances to start a startup or give it a go or go work for a startup, whatever you're doing, it doesn't have to be you're going to be the boss, we're very privileged at the point we are, whether you're at university or not, to be able to do it. Until you give it a go, again, you won't know. And for me, for example, I was doing a pizza startup in Bristol. I had to make that work at the time to be able to afford my uni. Otherwise, I was getting kicked off, if you don't pay your fees. So I didn't always have that luxury, and that gave me a bit of drive. But at the same time, that can be really negative. because we talk about the fine line about whether to keep going or not. I probably exhausted that option for too long with the fact I didn't have a choice to give up because, we had to keep paying bills. So yeah, I definitely think give it a go whilst you can. I'm very privileged in the sense of, if this fails, I'm still 24. I can go find a job. I'm not going to be in my 40s, 50s saying, oh, you've got no CV experience. So I just say give it a go. That's all. And the younger you do it, the better. Even if at university, it's a really good place to get startup funding, whether 5,000, £100 or so. There's some funding there. And if all goes wrong, you still got a university degree out of it at the same time. So you're not looking like you've wasted your years. So
Yeah, I love the advice as well that when you are still young, even if it doesn't work, and even if you then don't use it to go and pursue another business, you're still young, you'll still have a university degree. But also, I think this can lead quite well into my next question. The learnings that come from entrepreneurship, if you are an individual who's started a company and it didn't work for whatever reason, the amount you've learned would make you significantly more attractive to a potential organization looking to hire someone with that entrepreneurial mindset. But for yourself, Brent, how much have you learnt along the journey, effectively, especially in the early stages where you're doing everything? It's not like a large organization where things are done for you and you just sit in your little area and you do your work that you are hired for. You've got to do everything. So how has that experience shaped the amount that you've been able to learn across sort of all fields of a business?
it's an interesting question. And sometimes the one I have a mentor, obviously I mentioned a few mentors, but one of them is, say, he's more of a personal mentor. We don't really talk about work. It's how are you doing? It's a big part of a startup is stress. And I look back now when you ask that question and I say, what would have got me really stressed about 4 years ago is very minute today. And I think that's the one big learning I've had over the years. And he always says to me, what have you learned this year? And I sometimes have to sit down and actually think about what have I learned? Because it doesn't feel like a lot, but managing stress is the biggest one. Going through firing people, hiring people, managing people's sick days, or they've got problems as employees. And I think that's the big one as you grow, is you feel like all you do is HR. That's definitely where I'm at the moment, learning all those kind of things. You get to the point where you learn about how to write a P&L, cash flow statements, all that kind of stuff. That seems quite early on. As you get to a bigger team, that seems to be where it goes, as well as cash flow. Big part of it is making sure you've got enough to keep running. And with what we do with cars, it becomes quite expensive. And all it takes is a couple large companies not to pay, and you're suddenly scrambling around. So being able to deal with that stress and keep the team motivated at the same time is a really big learning I've probably noticed over my years. And I could take through to whether I go work for another company or if I started another one again, that would, help me a lot. A couple of years worth of experience of doing that for sure.
Brent, you mentioned previously regarding how you had to be doing your ventures while studying at university to pay the bills. I wanted to ask you though, how prepared did you feel prior to starting those? And how prepared did you feel to start Voltric at the time at which you did?
Not at all on any of them. And I think that's the big thing. You'll never, even now, if someone says to me, could you do Voltric again today? From scratch, 4 years, 5 years worth of experience in it, I'd still say I don't feel ready. And I think that's where you always want to be. It's that imposter syndrome. You never want to feel like you're ready, because as soon as you feel comfortable, you're not growing. And that's the big thing we've noticed. Sometimes we feel, we're doing okay. And then you go, well, that means we're not growing. Something's not happening. I should feel stressed. And there's a balance to it. You don't want to become overworked and burnt out and stuff like that. But I definitely felt just as uneasy today as I probably did starting a very small little pizza company out of a set of kitchens that were paid for by the university. Definitely. So I don't think you'll ever feel ready. And if you do, you're normally not doing enough. I think that's the big one for me.
So when it comes to an individual maybe looking to set up an organization, again, you said you'll never feel prepared enough, but you just need to go in and take it on. Is there any advice you would give to someone, though, about things they should learn prior to starting that would maybe give them a little bit of an edge? Again, it's always trying to learn from other people's mistakes so that you don't have to make the mistakes. What advice would you give to someone on maybe a few specific things that they could get clued up on prior to taking the leap and starting their business?
Yeah, I'd say if there's a timeline, some people do have timelines. I've got a 3-month notice period of my job to work before I can start my startup. It's very rare. Otherwise, I would say just start. The biggest, growth lesson I learned is from just doing it. If you had those kind of restrictions in place for any reason, I'd say soft skills. So we're talking about coaching, managing stress, communication techniques, whether that be via email, cold calling, all the way to warm leads. I'd say that would be the biggest one for me. And something you can do quite easily, without courses, without, university education. You can go and find these stuff online, ILM qualifications for coaching, stuff like that. And for just reading books, I'd say that's the biggest thing I'd say for starting, because it's all about people, it's all about relationships. Some of our biggest partnerships have been through people we worked with in the past. They left, joined another bigger company. And because we have a great relationship, you've got that communication. We launched a partnership with a company we wouldn't have expected to. So that would be the big thing for me.
Brent, what's the most pivotal decision you've made as a founder?
Besides Voltric and pivoting to what we do today, because I say that's definitely one up there. I think the one for me has been draw my emotion away from the company. And it sounds like it's not a pivot, but I was, emotionally, Julian and I would both say this was our baby, we bought this, but actually to, in a sense, almost withdraw yourself, I think has been a positive and probably the best pivot I've done in terms of myself. A couple of reasons why is I talk about treading that line where you feel like you're in that bubble, you know, why aren't people buying my product? Why aren't, this should be working. This is perfect. No, this is perfect maybe for you, but not for the thousands of people you want to sell this to. And that's the thing that matters, because that's what pays the bills and pays, makes this grow. You can't learn that until you've kind of taken a step back and taken emotion out of it. Secondly, for me, I think it helps our team that I'm in a better headspace because I'm not emotionally sat there looking at every review we get, every problem that's going wrong. I'm going down that point of burnout because I'm trying to fix it. It's thinking with a reasoned head and trying to make sure that the decision's correct. I think that's been the biggest pivot for me, and being able to manage stuff as well. Otherwise, Voltric probably wouldn't be here. We'd all be burnt out. We'd be all very upset, and it wouldn't have been the greatest kind of achievement I'd done because I was so emotionally invested. There's a borderline for how much you should be, and there can be a thing as too much. And people are in denial about what they've built or what they're building.
I mean, you wear your heart on your sleeve as an entrepreneur. It's effectively, it's your baby. You've seen it from idea stage when it was nothing, all the way until it's this organization. There are clients, there are people buying, there's money passing through hands. You mentioned emotionally detaching yourself from it. Has stress been an issue that maybe you've struggled with? Again, everyone deals with stress, but throughout your journey with Voltric and even prior has stress been something that's plagued you a little bit?
Yeah, and I'd question anybody who's an entrepreneur with a decent, decent sized company, whether that be £100,000, £10,000, £1 million, to say no, because they're either very well at hiding it or they have it. And that's the thing I think you realise. For me, definitely, and I'm sure Julian, probably a similar situation as I, where stress definitely it yo-yos with the seasons as more money comes in, more money goes out, and it never gets smaller. It never gets larger. I think that's the big thing to notice. You just deal with it better. So maybe a bigger problem, maybe a bigger success, but you've learned to balance yourself a little bit. And there's definitely been times that are tougher. You become to burnout. At the time I was doing Voltric, but working as a chef, again, to pay bills, to pay rent, till 2, 3 in the morning. And then you're up at 8 working with Voltric, and then back again working all night chefing. That definitely causes stress. And I don't think that will ever go. And whilst I'm doing this, I hope it doesn't, because like I said before, I won't feel fulfilled. Stress definitely gives me some level of fulfillment in a weird way. It feels like I'm doing something. I'm giving back something. So yeah, definitely something I don't talk about massively, especially with the team, but is there.
I think there's definitely a misconception when it comes to entrepreneurship that it's all, fun and games. You're your own boss. You don't answer to anyone. But I think people fail to forget that with a large organization, a lot of the stress is dispersed across however many people, and ultimately, again, it falls down on the CEO, or it falls down on the C-suite, for example. How do you think your ability to manage stress, and more generally, how do you think the amount of stress that you're able to take on and you're able to embrace, as you said, you sort of see it as a sign that you're growing, that things are changing, and that the company is improving? How do you think that sort of ability to manage those levels of stress correlates directly with the success of you as an individual, but also your organization?
I think as a corporation or company, I think it definitely has some correlation between the two. As stress kind of grows for us, our revenue grows. I remember the day we hit our first million in revenue. I think we celebrated for about, albeit 90 seconds, before I was already talking about other problems we had with clients that we wanted to fix. So there's always kind of some level of stress, but it comes with that benefit of you are doing better. So I do think there's a correlation there. Personally, I think it would depend on the person. So for me, I do think there's a correlation, but I don't think for all. It's not healthy in all senses of your life. It can be quite damaging to your health in general. I've definitely seen a few grey hairs as I've been doing Voltric rather than doing Lampco out of my bedroom kind of thing. It's definitely a lot more stress, but managing it, it comes in different ways, whether that is having the right team with you, I think is a big one, to be able to handle those stresses alongside you. And I think that's where we talk about taking that step back. It's hard to do because not everyone's going to do it perfect. It's just reality. They're going to make mistakes just like you did, but you'll notice it more because it's not you, and you think, I should have just done that. And then there's also the managing stress of, different for everybody, but going on holiday, go surfing, things I like to do, living on a little island. You do less of it as you get larger because you have less time, or you feel as you do anyway. It's just making sure you make time for those things. When I go on holiday, I now lock my phone in the safe, and I won't see it until I come back at the end of the day. So I very much hope so that I don't go lost because I will have no Apple Maps or any of that. But I lock it away and don't look at it. Otherwise, it does become a bit of the bane of your life. Whilst you're on holiday, you don't take that break, and I think that's really important. Like you say, for C-suite people who have that weight on their shoulders.
Brent, as mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about that moment. I know you said you only celebrated for 90 seconds, but achieving the 1 million mark in revenue is the dream of many entrepreneurs. And when you're going through this journey and you're constantly filled with doubt, you don't know whether things are going to work, you've got responsibilities, there's stress, as we mentioned. Hitting that milestone must have been, whether it be just an internal sort of feeling, it must have been a very proud moment for yourself and everyone related to the organization.
Yes and no. I definitely think that there was a sense of achievement, and I was proud of everybody in the team. Definitely didn't feel so proud of myself, not in a negative way, but as soon as I see a million made, I usually think, oh, we've got £1 million worth of bills to pay. That's usually the case, especially as you're growing, because we're now a profit, EBITDA making company. Since this year, we kind of went to a lean model to try and grow and become profit making, which is very rare as a startup, especially in the car business. So that for me just meant, okay, I've got a fair few to crack on with, and we straight away thought, well, we've done 1 million in a year. What can we do to make 10 million? And that was the kind of mindset. I think it's just taking, and that's where having a business partner is important. Because Julian said to me, I straight away start trying to talk about the next problem. He goes, hold on, we'll talk about it on Monday. Let's just enjoy this Friday of making 1 million in X number of months, etc. And it becomes a normal. I think when I hear people who make 100 million in a company, I think, oh, that must be amazing. That must be an achievement. But once you've been doing it, it suddenly becomes not so great. It seems quite small because you just notice it over time, and it kind of takes that kind of surprise away. So it's definitely nice, and I'm very proud of the team, who've done 99% of the work to get there. But I don't think we'd be doing so well if I didn't think, okay, how can we do 10? And I think you need those people in the team who bear that responsibility of maybe not enjoying the achievement, but going, what do we do next? And that's what we want to do. How do we get better?
You mentioned your co-founder, Julian. I wanted to touch a little bit on that and the importance of having a co-founder, not only from a professional level in terms of division of tasks, especially at the beginning, but also in terms of mental support. Having someone who's on the same journey as you, they know the issues that you're facing on a daily basis. And what advice would you give to someone maybe looking at starting their own business on the merits of having a co-founder?
Yeah, so I did my first business was solo until I had a couple of people on the team, 3 or 4 at the time. Second one was with a co-founder, and then this one obviously with Julian as a co-founder. And being a large company, you feel the effect of having one more. I definitely think it's important from multiple perspectives of an investment point of view. Having 2 people, 3 people usually means there's a bit of reliability there. If one person goes, the business doesn't collapse. Same with, like you mentioned, mental support. Julian probably won't like it that I say we are friends, but not in that capacity. We are through work, and we always call it a second marriage, is having that level of being able to have a confrontation, but in a productive way. And you've got to meet someone, if it's a really close friend you knew before the company, that can be quite tough because you may not say what you feel. You may hold back a few blows. Whereas Julian and I, we have that respect for each other where this is what I'm thinking. It's a hard balance. And, we might not have it right. It might be different for everybody. But I definitely feel that having someone to lean on, even saying, look, I need 5 days out. I need to take this week where you sort it. You take this part of the business off me and vice versa. Same for holidays. It's really hard when there's only one person in the company who's doing payroll, who's doing HR problems, if you want to go away. Especially when you're in that middle stage like we are at the moment. We don't have a HR department in full. It's nice to have someone to lean on to be able to take those responsibilities and pay bills and keep everything moving so you're not taking your laptop with you. I definitely think solo, being a founder as a solo person is really quite hard. And you might see that from some investment people who won't invest in solo founders for that reason. Because as it becomes larger and larger, it gets really hard.
You know how they say, don't mix friendships with business. What do you think of that?
One thing my parents taught me quite early on is, so they were founders themselves. They met through working together. And they always said it out of experience of that, don't mix the two. And I definitely have some level of agreement. I wouldn't employ or have partnered or anything with probably my very close friends. It becomes that. And same with investment and stuff like that. We have taken investment from friends and family when we started. And it becomes quite a barrier when we talk about, mental strength, all that kind of stuff, a time to be able to step away. If that time you step away from work is to someone you work with or is invested in your company, you never have that, way to relieve stress. You're always thinking about it because you might want to mention a bad thing that's happened at work, but you can't because they work there or they're invested in your company, so you don't want to give a negative image. So I definitely think that's quite a sound advice. There's levels to it. Same with Julian and I, we're definitely friends, but he's not someone I've known for years and years before. So we have employed people I've known from school, for example, but we weren't close friends. So I think that's where there's a little bit of a grey area, but I definitely agree with the statement.
You mentioned raising funds from friends and family at the early stages. If I may ask, how much have you raised so far and from which style of investors? VCs, angels, obviously family and friends, as you mentioned.
So we raised just over £500,000. We went to raise another round about a year ago. And that's where we took this pivot, a smaller pivot so far, that actually we're going to go for a lean method and become profitable first. Not become reliant on investment, which as money's become quite expensive to get nowadays compared to what it was pre-COVID, where it was very easy per se to get investment. So we've done £500,000 just over. We're now doing another raise currently actually at the moment for £1.5 million. And we've taken investment from small angel investors. I come from the Channel Islands. There is no capital gains tax, so we don't need SEIS, EIS, even though we are for UK investors, but it becomes quite a a unique style to get investors from the islands over here because it's quite a renowned thing to do. We've got a VC investor on board as well. We also have institutional investors as well from Development Bank of Wales. So we've got a diverse range of investors from ex-CEO of Bupa, ex-CEO of J Sainsbury's, and a bunch of others.
One thing they don't teach you in school and that I'm certain about is how to raise that amount of money. How was the experience for you, and what advice would you give to someone out there looking to fund their first business, never gone through the fundraising process? What piece of advice would you give to those people?
And I think this is where you start to see patterns in, especially things I'm saying today, which is becoming a people person and why I mentioned soft skills, whether that be for, like we say, the hiring process, partnering with companies, but all the way down to investment. And I think is a big part. It becomes different as you get down the later stages and you're investing with VCs and stuff like that who want to see a set level of growth. They want to see a specific way of doing financials, etc. And data rooms and stuff like that with all your agreements. The big one for me was we had two investors early on. I think they did £25,000 each or so at the very early stages. They invested without looking at a pitch deck, which is quite interesting. We didn't even get to the set of financials. We didn't get to any of that. And the reason was because they liked us as people. And they wanted to invest in whatever we were doing at the time, which I think was borderline around the time we'd done the pivot. So I can't remember if it was before or after. But, that's important to us. And that shows actually, okay, they are the same as mentors. You want to find those people who want to do it for the right reasons. And they definitely were. Obviously, that's not always going to be the case. But early on, you can have a great set of financials. But at the end of the day, if you're not making a lot of revenue or if any, that it's just numbers on a spreadsheet that might or might not be true. So you've got to make them like you. Sometimes that involves a bit of fakeness and you have to. There's some people you don't always want to talk to. But the big thing at the end of the day is relationships, how you talk, how, you get people to enjoy. I've just spent actually a weekend at one of the Arsenal matches with one of our investors. And he's great as almost a mentor as well. It's spending time with people like that. And that's how you get them, to help invest. When you get to VC, does pivot, like we mentioned, you have to go through the program of going to investment committees, doing this, doing that. It does pivot, but at the end of the day, it's also, being a people's person. If you've got a great investor or a network who can put a really good word in for you with those VCs, actually happened with one of ours, it makes it a lot easier.
How did you take Voltric from that initial idea? And what was the sort of roadmap in your head? Okay, are we going to bootstrap? Are we going to use a lot of our own money to try and get this to a stage where we could then get funds from friends and family, venture capitalists, etc., etc.? How was that for you? And what advice would you give to other people looking to follow in the same path?
And it's very hard, depending on the company, it's very different for other people. So my advice might not be right if you are starting a health tech, fintech, insure tech, whatever it is. It may be different. But for us, it was, and as I've mentored some companies out of Bristol and stuff like that, I always say, can you do this without investment? 90+% of the time you can. And I think that's where actually growing. And so what the answer to your question, sorry, is we bootstrapped. We took a vase for £75,000 at the very start to be able to pay some bills, get us over the line. It's a heavily regulated area we're in. It takes a lot of money to start up, to be FCA regulated, all of this kind of stuff, the insurance. We did that to get us going. And we essentially just bootstrapped, put sweat equity in to get this up and running. The reason is because I said, can we do this without investment? Yes. And you can always model away. People say, oh, but I need to build this tech feature. I need to build this. Do you have to make this MVP work or minimal viable product work? No. Okay, let's try it and build it later if we need to. Most of our features that we said back in the day, we've never built still now, even after making millions. It's just the reality of it. It becomes different. People don't need it. You can do it. Pen and paper method. And that's normally what I'd say. Great investment, as we are now raising again. Investment can be a really beneficial thing. But I always try and focus it that all it's going to do is make us grow faster. We aren't reliant on that investment to be able to survive. And, if we were, I don't think we'd be at the growth, the size we are now. It was just go out and sell. And that was the reality. And build something worthwhile. Build something that we don't really, as I mentioned, marketing wise, you don't need to massively sell. People talk about it. People want to come to you. That's what we tried to do.
You mentioned not including and not developing some of the features for Voltric that were in the original idea. And I think it's quite an important point to note for young entrepreneurs with an idea, the importance of validating that idea prior to doing anything, prior to even getting a website up, getting work done towards the first MVP. What would you say is the importance of really validating the idea at a very, very early stage? Obviously, not spending years trying to validate the idea and then you never actually get anywhere. But what would you say the importance of it is?
So it's really important, especially if you're looking for investment or you're about to put a big outlay of money. For us, it was, people said about, oh, we'd have an electric car subscription. Great, you're doing surveys. We did market research for months and months saying, people will do this, people will buy it. Very different for people to tick a yes or no box compared to saying, I'm going to give you £500-600 per month for the next 2-3 years. That is a very different kind of model validation. So what we said was, okay, give us £500 a month, or I think it was 380 at the time for a Renault Zoe. Pay us now. And people did. And so we went and then made sure the model worked. So we ended up having to go and we took a COVID bounce back loan and we bought these cars brand new from a dealership and we delivered them and did the subscription. We now went, well, people will pay for this. They have paid for it. And that was really important for us. No one took us seriously until that first kind of orders came in. It is a scary sense. As soon as that money lands in your account and you suddenly go, okay, I've got to make this work now. I don't have a choice. The reality is you could refund them their £500. It's still a scary thought. I think it's really important. And there's so many models out there that you can do this for little or no money. And people do this, free trial for 7 days. Great, you can show that 100,000 people signed up for something for free. Now get them to pay for it. And I think that's the big thing, is actually doing it for an amount of money. Because if you're not actually proving the point in the correct validation. So that'd be the big thing for me. I think it's really important, especially if you're about to spend a lot of money. We do it on all our features now. We will A/B test it. We will do all sorts before we spend a penny on it. And I think that's a really big thing. And we'll speak to our customers who pay us currently. Will this make you pay more, less? Will it make a difference to your life? Yes, no. And if it's enough people and it's going to make us money, we'll do it. And that's a big part.
One of the biggest hurdles for many startups is building relationships with key industry players. I mean, you've managed to do this with some of the biggest names, such as Renault, Tesla. How did you go about forming these relationships, and what should young entrepreneurs keep in mind when attempting to build strategic relationships in their own industries?
It's about putting yourself out there. And as a young entrepreneur, one thing I really struggled with was, we partnered with some really large companies, the ones you mentioned, but Thrifty, Europe Car, people like that. And we're talking about expanding outside of the UK currently and partnering with these companies in places like France, Spain, stuff like that. It's really tough when they suddenly realize you're 20-something years old. When I first started this, I couldn't actually currently use our own product because I was too young for the car insurance. That was quite a scary reality. And so one thing I always did was actually the people who I did these partnerships with, I'd use a mobile phone. I wouldn't have a video call. I wouldn't tell them my age. I'm quite lucky that I have a deep enough voice that I can get away with being late 20s or so. And I use that to my advantage. I actually had a conversation with one of these people who we've signed 2 of the large agreements with as we move companies. And he said I probably wouldn't have, it would have made an effect about what I thought about you. It definitely does have an effect. And I think, again, it's just relationships. And it's about doing it in a way that works for you. For me at the time, it was pick up a mobile phone, get to know these people really well, then look about how can we partner. And just choosing the right person in the company. Don't always try and go through a business development manager, because they'll try and always promise you the world and sell you everything. Go directly to the MD of these companies. Try and go for the big hitter. You usually get some decision-making power, and it won't take you 10 months to do the agreement, which will happen if you go for someone a little bit lower down.
I want to talk a little bit about sustainability now, Brent. What would you say the importance is for young entrepreneurs to try and find that intersection between business and sustainability. Obviously, it's a big focus of Voltric. So I'd be curious to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think obviously what we do naturally has a sustainability factor to it. It's electric cars. Whether you agree with them or not, we're always trying to make a step in the right direction. So move people out of petrol or diesel into electric, whether the future is going to be hydrogen or whatever it is. We're looking at the next kind of best thing. So for us, it was, we have a focus, but you still need to make this worthwhile. You need to make this a credible solution which can make you money. Because the reality is, unless you're someone like Bill Gates with big enough backing, which makes it a foundation, and enough money behind you, you're not doing this for free. You're not doing this to lose money. And so sometimes it is about, people have this massive 100% sustainability focus in every detail, which I do get and I appreciate. But unless you can make money off this and still keep it running, it's really hard, because you're never going to be big enough. You're never going to grow enough or survive to create that value anyway. So what we did was, okay, let's make the sole purpose of this business model a sustainability option. And then from there, try and grow it and go through the details slowly about, can we make our team, remote work and stuff like that, so that they don't have to travel as much, all of these kind of things. How can we make people drive more sustainably? Those have come things later down the line with products, rather than off the ground. Have a core purpose is all I'd say, and make sure you've got the right people thinking about it. It's not going to be 100% sustainable off day one in all cases.
I want to understand a little bit about how you define success for yourself beyond maybe just financial metrics.
Big question. It'll probably change every year, every couple of months. I think that's the reality. For me, it's just about creating value. Whether that's for me personally, becoming a better entrepreneur, becoming a better person, whether I go and work at a job after, or creating value for people who've driven our cars, being able to get into an electric car because of what we do. The people, one big thing I love seeing, as I mentioned, being proud of the team, but is the growth of people in the company. We've gone through tough times, gone through good times, working for us. That's, definitely part of it. Doing team days together, team celebrations, awards, sharing that as a community, both customers and your employees. That is rewarding in itself. I don't see an end point of success. I'd like to say I'm already successful in some ways, especially at my, kind of our age. Yeah, I don't really see an end goal with it. I think it's just kind of doing what we're doing and making sure I'm never too comfortable is one big thing, because then I feel like I said earlier about comfortability for me and, providing value and still growing. I feel like just always sitting in that area is quite nice. Success isn't a catchable thing for me at the moment. I think it is just something you live, and you sometimes hit it. Joy, you sometimes hit it, you sometimes don't. I think it's the same thing with success. Changes day on day.
What motivates you, Brent? Is there anyone out there you're trying to make proud, or is there a deeper sort of motivating factor behind all that you do?
I think definitely my parents definitely have something motivating. They refuse to help, but in that way do help themselves. They won't comment on what I'm doing. They won't try and provide advice. They won't provide funding, all that kind of thing. But that's helped me, because that's pushed me to try and, make them proud as entrepreneurs and people who've done this before. They're still doing it in some sense as well. And that's definitely a motivating factor for me. I think it's also just, I can't sit around twiddling my thumbs. I've got to keep busy. If I went to a job 9 till 5 working for someone else, I don't feel like I'd have that sense of achievement. I'd get bored quite quickly in a sense as well. And something I definitely struggle with is boredom and, jumping between things. So entrepreneurship's a great thing for that. So yeah, that's definitely something that motivates me and keeps me pedaling in the right way as well.
Brent, thank you so much. It's been a privilege talking to you today. We do actually have a closing tradition here on the podcast where we ask, if you could go back and give one piece of advice to your 16-year-old self, what piece of advice would that be?
I think it'd be, don't be scared. And you mentioned a few questions during this podcast, which is related to how can you get people to start X, Y, Z as a young entrepreneur? How can you get them to not worry about failure? Failure can be detrimental. We always say, oh, it's fine, it's great, it's a learning kind of opportunity. It is, 100% agree. But for people who may not have that backup method of, being able to pay bills no matter what, having a student loan if you're in university, it can be detrimental. But I'd just say, don't be scared, because the what if's always bigger if you don't do it. You know what happens if you give it a go. So that'd be my big learning for looking back when I was younger.
Brent, thank you so much. It's been a huge honour talking to you today, learning a bit about your story, and I'm sure all the advice that you've shared will go a long way in inspiring some future entrepreneurs out there. So huge thank you from me. Thank you.
It's still been a pleasure.